Hello and welcome to another edition of For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guest today is John Torgan. He is Director of Ocean and Coastal Conservation for the Nature Conservancy, the Rhode Island chapter. It's his first time on the show. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
First time on this show, but you are a media regular, radio and TV. People may have heard of the Nature Conservancy, so in general, let's talk about that first. What is it?
Sure. Thanks for having me on. It's just great to be able to reach your audiences and to be right here with you in the studio. The Nature Conservancy is the world's largest conservation organization. It's a global organization. We're active in over 30 countries, and we work to preserve the land and water upon which all life depends. And we do it in any number of ways. Here in southern New England, it is about the connection between land and water, that the quality of our water and of our coastal communities reflects the health of the land and the rivers that flow to the sea.
Now, the fact that the Nature Conservancy, in its name, it was decided way back when that something like this was needed. What was the reason? Was there like too much development, too much industry? Were people kind of just intruding onto land to the point where, you know, nature was going away, basically?
Yeah, the origins of the Nature Conservancy date back to the 1950s and 60s, and it started really in earnest in upstate New York with a citizens group that was looking to protect a treasured area of forest from development. And they organized and put that aside. And that approach, that not just the role of government, but the role of society to set aside and protect land that has extraordinary environmental and public value is something that caught on fast and really grew throughout the country. That yes, government will buy and set aside parks, but for a private homeowner, let's say, who has a farm or a forest and wants to pass it on to the next generation, but wants to make sure that it never becomes a strip mall, they can give that property to the Nature Conservancy, and the Nature Conservancy will honor those wishes to steward it and to keep it forever wild for future generations.
That's great. There are situations where if you wanted to buy a parcel of land, you would be required to develop it in some way, and this is just the opposite. You're preventing, a strip mall from going up, basically.
In many cases, that's it. And that's been traditionally the role of the Nature Conservancy, which is to protect land. However, in the past decade, and really in the last several years, we have ramped up our ocean and coastal conservation activities, which get into the public waters where you can't buy it, you can't set it aside. It's all of ours to share together. And so on that, we bring great science, we bring great conservation thinking, and work with government and with agencies and local communities and our partners to protect and restore and ensure the health and function of these great coastal communities. So it goes hand in glove with our land protection effort.
Talk to me about the state of protected areas and Nature Conservancy in general. How is it going? Are you fighting an uphill battle? Are things going well for you? What is life like?
Well, we talked about this before we got on, but when I grew up in Rhode Island, and I was always a child of the water, loved fishing. My earliest memories out on Narragansett Bay with my dad in our little fishing boat chasing after bluefish and striped bass. And as a teenager, worked on Block Island and just loved Block Island so much, and have come to know the Nature Conservancy and really appreciate the Nature Conservancy for its great efforts on Block Island over the years. The Nature Conservancy has been a part of conserving and setting aside more than 40% of that island for conservation for the public. It's not like it's a museum, you can't go there.
Right.
Anyone can walk there, anyone can enjoy it. In fact, the trails are hunted and fished and hiked.
You just can't develop in that section of Block Island where it's preserved.
Exactly, and this has been the wishes of the island, and it's helped to preserve Block Island in a unique way that even Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket and other places have not. So that was my introduction personally to the Nature Conservancy. In terms of Rhode Island and Connecticut and southern New England region more broadly, land protection continues, and getting land protected and critical watersheds protected continues to be a priority. But what happens in coastal communities like this one and like Providence, where I live, and the southern coast of Rhode Island, is that in order to really have a healthy natural environment that people can use and enjoy, we need to stop pollution. We need to get at governance and management and public policy to make sure that those spaces that we share, especially those tidal waters that we share, are as clean and healthy as they can be and safe for people to use and enjoy with peace of mind. And so that's a little bit of a different shift. It's not just about private land. It's not just about public land. It's about the water and the connection between land and water.
Should I feel guilty if I wanted, if I thought a highway was a good idea just because of what it will do to the land that it will be a part of?
No, you shouldn't feel guilty. And this isn't about, it really isn't a moral or political agenda that we follow, and we embrace all political and civic viewpoints on the issue. But we believe that when land and water is healthy and it's protected, that's the highest value to the community, economically, ecologically. Now, do we call for all of land to be a nature preserve? No, we have to carefully balance our uses and protect existing uses, and that goes for the water as well as the land. We're not trying to stop fishermen from fishing, lobstermen from lobstering. It's about making sure that those places that the fish and lobster depend on are healthy and are going to produce fish and lobsters into the future. I
think humans forget sometimes that they need nature, that it goes hand in hand. You kind of can't exist without one another, don't you think?
Well, that's the beautiful thing about it, is that people, they think of nature as a faraway forest or field or a mountain, but not where they are. But the truth is, our environment is not a special interest. It's a public interest. It's everywhere. It's all around us. And what we can do to improve our environment improves our lives. It improves our economy. It improves our culture. And we don't see it as at odds, for example, with economic development, as is so often cited. Oh, we need to, we love the environment, but we need to relax environmental protection to get jobs and to advance economic development. That's not true. And it's especially not true here in southern New England, where the coastal communities and the estuaries and rivers give us the value. And it's not just the value of fish landed and sold at market, but why would you want to live in Stonington? Why would you want to live in Rhode Island?
They're beautiful
Most
towns.
people want to live there because of the ocean,
right?
And everything that comes with the ocean and the coastal waters or the rivers that run through it, and we're all connected to that. So whether we think we care about it or not, it should matter to us.
Now, being the Rhode Island chapter director, the thing about, I want to really get into Rhode Island, but the fact of the matter is, and we were talking about this off the air a little bit too, is the way waterways work, you can't help but be involved with your neighboring states, Connecticut, Massachusetts, whatever, because that's just how the land and the waterways work, right?
Exactly. And just to be clear, so the Nature Conservancy is a national, in fact, a global organization. I direct ocean and coastal conservation, and we actually have a state of Rhode Island director who's my boss.
Okay.
But what you say is exactly right. So we work together. We're one conservancy, and we work very closely with our counterparts here in Connecticut for those shared lands and waters that contribute to the same systems. And because the fish and the birds and the pollution doesn't adhere to political boundaries, neither do we. We recognize that we need to work together on what we call ecosystem-based management, which means sort of a fancy word for saying, like, let's look at the watershed. Where does this water drain from in this river, and where is it going to? And who do we need to work with to help make sure that the water that's running through that river is healthy and that the fish have access to their native streams? And so this is the kind of approach we take. It's a regional approach, but it's place-based. People really care about, they don't care about southern New England. They care about Westerly. They care about Jamestown. They care about, about New London. And it's the places that they see, and they want to know that groups like the Nature Conservancy are out there looking after their interests, to protect those places, to make sure they're managed properly into the future. That's why people support groups like ours, and it's our obligation to do that the best way we know how. And that does involve some government relations from the local.
Does that mean lobbying? Or?
It does, actually. There's state and federal lobbying that we do to get good legislation and to fight bad legislation. But that's just part of what we do. Like advocacy and public policy is one piece of it. Direct conservation is another piece of it, which is what we talked about, where you actually get land and set it aside or get the rights to develop or not to develop land and manage those. And another big area that we're working in, especially these days, is restoration. Going in and physically fixing those places that have been degraded and damaged.
Well, let's talk about that because we've had it interesting last year. Superstorms, hurricanes, blizzards, ice storms. You know, there were more bad weather days than good weather days, it seemed like, you know, particularly after Sandy. And you mentioned Westerly because Musqueamicut Beach area was hit really hard, and you know they had a timeline to meet to get everything back to get tourists back in for the start of their season. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, these storms, you know, we seem to get a big one every year nowadays. It was Irene in 11, it was Sandy in 12. In 2010, Rhode Island had epic flooding.
Floods, yes.
Floods in 2010, and so, you know, whether it is human-induced climate change or not, the fact is it's real and it's here. We're seeing sea level rise. We're seeing all these manifestations of a changing climate, and it undermines the safety and the environmental health and the economy of these communities. And so we need to take strong steps, strong actions now to address what we're seeing happening. And what that means is building resilience into those coastal communities, looking for, you know, when you talk about hurricanes and the damage that comes, the loss of barrier beaches and the inundation of homes and coastal communities, you know, we're not going to tell you shouldn't have built there, this is a bad place, you have to leave. That's not what we do. What we do is we go in and look at opportunities to restore the natural function and health of those areas wherever possible, using natural solutions like conservation and restoration and soft, you know, using vegetation, using oyster shells, using natural media to help give nature the boost that it needs to reduce that risk to people and to property.
Musqueamicut Beach in particular, they rebuilt dunes, or you know, yes, because they had to. It was necessary. The Environmental Protection Agency, I don't know who it was that said you kind of have to. They filtered the sand and cleaned it and put it back in. And a lot of the buildings, you know, you say don't build there. A lot of them were kind of grandfathered. They're so old that they were grandfathered into their specs aren't what a new building would be like if you built it, you know, today. And when they rebuilt, they kind of had to follow the new guidelines.
Well, definitely that. I mean, that's what. So certainly there are. When we build back, we don't just want to rebuild what was there and got wiped out. We have to build back smarter. We're not saying don't build back. In some cases, it doesn't make sense to build back. And in some cases, you're really shoveling against the tide, literally. And in those cases, we would argue that the best thing to do is to let it go and let nature take its course, because if it's undeveloped, those barrier beaches and those dunes and the other coastal wetlands and marshes, they work for you every day. Buffering storms, reducing pollution, filtering pollution, and improving the ecological function of those areas. So development is not appropriate everywhere. In some cases, we do have to protect. In those cases where we have to protect infrastructure, let's do it in the greenest way possible, in a way that maximizes habitat value and that minimizes hardening. We don't want to just build a big seawall across all of southern Rhode Island and Connecticut. That wouldn't work, number one, and second of all, it would just really exacerbate the problem, and it would lose these wonderful beaches that people go to surf, and that's not what we want to do. So what we have to do is work with nature. Don't try to fight it.
Right.
Let's look at conservation and restorative opportunities wherever possible, not everywhere, but we need planning, we need a comprehensive policy, and we're really pleased that the state of Rhode Island has just embarked on what's called a special area management plan, but it's actually a new set of state policies for the entire ocean coastline of Rhode Island. And so getting engaged in that conversation and looking for ways to incent good behavior and to incentivize the giving of some of these lands to conservation, to restoration, and to protection is where we think we can really make a difference on this.
Long Island is probably one of the greatest natural barriers that exist, especially for Connecticut, New York, right?
Long Island does.
Yeah.
Long Island is really, in many ways, at the forefront of the Nature Conservancy in North America in dealing with this, and we've been involved in the post-Sandy response in New York City. The mayor and the governor in New York got in touch with our leadership to ask for our help in thinking through, okay, so now you bought out Staten Island property, for example, then what? Just leave it there? You know, there's got to be a remediation plan, a stewardship plan, a restoration plan for those places that are damaged and that are being bought out. And for those communities that really took a hard hit in Sandy, we want to be helpful to those communities to think about how they can redevelop in a smarter way that's going to minimize their risk, and that's going to allow their communities to remain vital.
Did your role change? Did the Nature Conservancy's role change after something like Sandy? I mean, natural disasters occur all the time, but the damage from New Jersey right on up. Talk about that a little bit.
Thanks for asking, Sean. Before Sandy, we got together. We have what we call whole systems teams, which are these regional teams. In this case, it's Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and New York that meet, and we work to plan together to work collaboratively. And one of the things that we were working on is this coastal climate change, adaptation, sea level rise. Before Sandy, we were saying, how are we going to get people to understand why this should matter to them, why it's important to them, and how it affects the economy?
A superstorm made them,
even if it doesn't, if they don't live on the coast. After Sandy, it was easy to get everyone clearly understood, no matter where they lived, how this would affect them. Then the question became, okay, so now you have all this federal money and all these agencies, and what's the program here? What are we going to do? What are our priorities? Do we know how to invest this money to make sure that we're really doing the public good and the environment good in what we're doing? Or are we just sticking fingers in the dike and hoping that this doesn't happen again when we expect it may. So it did change the dynamic completely, and I think it's a great opportunity for this region, even though it was a terrible disaster, to show leadership in how we think about rebuilding and protecting these beaches, that we can do it in a way that's naturally sustainable.
It's surreal. I mean, as bad as it was up here, when you look down in New Jersey and you saw roller coasters underwater and bridges, and it just it hits you, and it makes you think that the power of nature and what it can do, good and bad. It can do some serious destroying whenever it wants, whenever it gets angry.
Exactly, and it's folly to think that we're going to be able to manage that or control it or even stop it. And it's very important on a national level that we get carbon emissions and climate change under control. It's important to all of us into the future, but at the local level and on the ground, what can we really do? There's plenty. There's plenty that we can do. It's working with communities to get a plan, and it's working with the governance to adopt policies and practices that are thoughtful, that are sustainable, that aren't just rebuilding in the face of danger, but that are building back in a way that helps allow nature to take its course, that use restorative solutions like we call it natural infrastructure, but using soft sand and vegetation. Oyster shells is something that we build reefs, living reefs using oysters and oyster shell as a substrate. That's a big problem.
As far back as Sandy was last fall, you had used the word restoration in what you're doing now. So even to this day, restoration and repair continues, doesn't it?
That's right. And so when I say restoration, we have a slightly revised view of restoration, where traditional restoration activities were things like go in and plant seed clams to grow adult clams and to seed the system, or plant scallops, or plant eelgrass to get eelgrass beds to grow again. And that work is great, and it's important, and it should continue. But what we've come to is to realize that it's about the stage and not the actors. That if the conditions are right for natural and healthful functioning rivers and estuaries and coastlines, they will, with a little help. But if you've got a water quality problem, you got pollution, you got degradation from nutrients and sewage and septics going in, no matter how much eelgrass you plant, is just going to die if the conditions aren't right to support it, and it's good money after bad. So our approach really takes into account the underlying conditions. We want to make sure that these bays and ponds are healthy, and that water that enters them is as clean as it can be, and that will enable us to plant scallops and plant clams and oysters, build oyster reefs, and let them be successful and propagate naturally. I mean, that's the definition. We don't want to be doing restoration forever. We want to give nature a boost to do its own thing, and then step back and let it do that.
Let me throw a word out at you, because there are views on both sides. Wind turbines.
Yes. Well, so we've been in the forefront of the nation again with the Rhode Island's Ocean Special Area Management Plan being the first federally approved wind energy area or ocean use planning exercise in the country, and Massachusetts following suit. And then just in the last 2 weeks, the the Federal Bureau of Ocean Energy Management announced the first large-scale offshore wind leases, really the first offshore wind lease sale agreement in U.S. history. So we may be the first to see offshore wind, and we look at it, I would say, in a circumspect way. We think that wind makes sense properly sited. We want to get to renewables, and renewables are better than fossils, so we really want to encourage the development of renewables. We also recognize that not every place is ideally suited for the siting of these things. So our role in that is to help bring really good science and good information to the table, and then engage in the process and help to shape a process that says if we're going to do this, we do it right. And if we're going to build offshore wind facilities, they be sited in a way that avoids or minimizes any negative impact to the environment, to fisheries, or other traditional uses. So basically, we're for it if it's sited properly.
Before we run out of time, I want to ask you, people watching the show today, if they want to learn more, if they want to be involved in the Nature Conservancy in some way, whether that be just some kind of financial support or maybe on some kind of volunteer basis, I'm sure you're always looking for people. How do they get involved?
Thank you for that. We go to nature.org, anywhere you are in the world, nature.org, and look up your local chapter and get in touch with the Nature Conservancy in Rhode Island. Those of you watching in Rhode Island, it's 331-7110, and you can reach me at jtorgan, J-T-O-R-G-A-N, at tnc.org, and we'd be happy to tell you more.
Is there something that you might be looking for in particular that you might be in need of as far as volunteers, anything along those lines?
Thank you. This summer we're doing oyster restoration, where shellfish habitat restoration, where we're collecting oyster shells from all of these different restaurants around Rhode Island, especially the Newport restaurants from Newport Harbor Corporation, and we're stockpiling those shells and curing them, and then we deploy them with volunteers in biodegradable mesh bags to build oyster reefs, to grow new oysters in the future, really for the environment's sake and all these other benefits. And so we need volunteers to come out and help with building these oyster reefs, and we'd love to have your help.
Got a little bit of time left, so I'm going to touch a little bit more on Block Island. I love it, love going there every summer. Like you said, about 40% of it is kind of roped off. You can still go through it, but it's reserved as a sanctuary. I was talking to somebody, I can't remember who it was from, maybe from Save the Bay or somewhere like that, where they were talking about the balance is starting to go to the point where people are getting concerned about bird droppings and what the problems that might cause too.
Yeah. So Block Island is a case of tiny year-round population, maybe
Right.
a couple hundred, that swells to 20,000 or more in the summertime. And Great Salt Pond, feels that pressure and then takes the rest of the year to heal those scars. So there are water pollution problems and tourist-related pollution problems that take place during the high season. So that's a concern, and so our approach to that is to work hard, first of all, to make sure that as much land is protected and well managed as possible. The other part of it is looking at those water pollution issues and looking at the opportunities for restoration on Block Island. This summer we're going to be going into Great Salt Pond with the scallop restoration project, and we're looking at doing some of those oyster reefs and shell recycling efforts in Block Island. So there are things we can do on Block Island to ensure that it stays healthy and that it stays clean. But despite the challenges and problems that it has, it's still in really fantastic environmental condition, really pristine condition.
Yeah.
When you look at it,
people seem to care about it too, and in no way do you want to curtail the tourism that's over there, because that's fantastic too, right?
Well, people have to be able to use and enjoy these resources. It's not preservation. This is conservation. It's about using them intelligently and making sure that they're there for our generation and for my kids and for the future to enjoy in the way that we've become accustomed. There's a lot of value to that here.
John Targan, the Director of Ocean and Coastal Conservation for the Nature Conservancy, Rhode Island chapter. It was fascinating and a pleasure having you on the show today.
Great. Thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us for another edition of For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. We will see you next time. Be sure to watch this show and many others on our YouTube site. Take care.